And that is why we're here, because Jesus loved each one of us. This morning, I am so glad that you're here with us. Over the last month, we've been doing a series here called Hot Topics. We've been talking about difficult subjects, things that are sometimes hot-button issues, whether it's society, culture, whatever it may be. But we've been talking about these hot-button issues. We've talked about pet sins and those little and insignificant sins that we don't think are a big deal, that God actually says is a big deal. Last week, a couple weeks ago, we talked about politics in the church. And politics can be a very dividing thing if we allow it to be. And so we talked about being good citizens. We talked about interactions on social media and the example we are and the Christian example we are as we do those things. Last week we talked about valuing people by including them. No matter who they are, no matter where they're from, no matter what their background is, we value people when we include them. That's how we love like Jesus did, the right way and the best way. And then we talked about intentionally trying to experience things from other people's point of view. Other people, we are different, and we can be different. And we talked about we can disagree about things without demonizing one another. And so I'm going to continue a little bit on that. But before I do, I want to talk today about being connected in a very distracted world. Some of you have one of these things. This is an iPhone. You either have an iPhone or a lesser quality mobile device. Just kidding. Just kidding. But you have one of these things, and these things can go off at any time, any place, whether you're trying to sleep, whether you're at work, wherever you are, these things can go off, and it could be a text message, it could be a phone call, it could be an email. We are more connected than we've ever been before with technology, but less connected interpersonally and actually having face-to-face relationships than we've ever been before. And so, how do we handle some of these things? The distractions of life. We all can get distracted by, it could be a phone, it could be something else, it could be something when you're driving down the road. I don't know if you've ever been driving down the road and you get distracted, but we all have the opportunity to be distracted. There are so many distractions in the world we live in and the culture we live in, and how do we remain connected in a distracted world? Well, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. But as we get into that, I want to ask two questions as we start. Two questions that I think are important this morning. The first one is this. If Jesus was trying to get your attention, could he do it through all the noise in your life? If Jesus was really trying to get through and get your attention, would he be able to do it through all the noise in our life? Would he be able to do it through our cell phones, our technology, the things we do at home, the relationships that we have, the relationships that we don't have? Would he be able to really get our attention and break through the noise in our lives? The second question is this. Can you be in a room with just silence? Nothing else going on? Some of you are like, yes, please, put me in a room with silence. I don't want to even... Some of us cannot even sit still if we're in a room with complete and utter silence. No TV, no phone, not watching anything, not doing anything, just sitting in a room, quiet and silence. Maybe an opportunity for God to speak to us in our lives. But it can be very challenging for some of us to do that. I want to mention this. I mentioned this in our membership class this morning. A survey was done a while back. And the question was asked, why does the church exist? Why does the church exist? And they were given two answers to choose from. And they asked church members, and then they asked pastors the exact same questions. Why does the church exist? And here's what the answers were. They could either choose from to meet my needs and the needs of my family, or to reach the world. As they asked that question over 1,000 churches, 89% of church members said their answer was that it was there to meet their needs and the needs of their families. And 11% of the church members believed that it was to reach the world. The opposite side of that, the pastors, when they asked the pastors the exact same question, 90% of pastors said it was to reach the world, and 10% to meet the needs of the people of the church and the families of the church. Today we're going to talk about distractions and divided attention. But one of the things that I think is important and foundational, and we have to set the foundation of why we exist as a church, because if we don't understand or know why we exist as a church, we'll have no direction, no motivation, no unity, really no foundation for where God is wanting to take us as a church. I want to read a scripture to us this morning. If you have a Bible, go to Acts chapter 4. Acts chapter 4, we're going to look at verse 32 and 33. There's a lot going on in the beginning of Acts chapter of Acts. Peter and John have just gone before the Sanhedrin. Here's what it says in verse number 32. The believers are gathered together, and it says, "All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and much grace was upon them." They looked out for one another. They cared for one another. No one considered their own possessions as their own. They said, hey, whatever I have is yours. We want to work together. And it allowed and enabled the apostles to do the work of spreading the resurrection power throughout the region. The mission was pretty clear to the early church. They knew what it was. And their mission was simply, they had one leader, and it was Jesus. They had one purpose: to communicate the gospel to people. That was their sole purpose. We want to follow Jesus, and we want to lead other people to follow Jesus. And that's really what our mission, that's what our heart here is at the church. They knew why they existed. There are distractions and things that divide our attention from being that kind of church and from being that church. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. I want to talk a little bit to start off with about being distracted from authentic community. I was in membership class this morning and telling people, if you were to cut me open, one of the things that I bleed is community and church community. The word community means common unity, that we have that thing in common. And if we're a believer in Christ, that common thing is Jesus Christ and what he's done for us and how he's changed our lives, that common unity. But there are a lot of things that get in the way of that common unity. There are a lot of things that get in the way. There are a lot of distractions that get in the way from those relationships bonding and forming. I believe that God is wanting in our church to enlarge our capacity for relationships. I believe that he's wanting to enlarge our influence in our community. And one thing that I never, ever, ever, ever want to happen when any man, woman, or child walks through the doors of this church is not to be able to find a place of community, not to be able to find a place where they can build relationships with other people. In other words, if we just stick with our own group and our own people and we don't allow other people to be a part of those groups or those people, then we're going to kind of handicap ourselves from doing what God really wants us to do as a church body. And it can happen in many different ways, but it doesn't mean that we can't have close friendships. I will always be an advocate. We want you to have deep and close friendships here. But we also want you to have an open hand that there may be other people that can be a part of who you are and be a part of your group and add value to that group. In February of 2012, Pastor Al had asked myself and Melissa, we had a conversation at a district function, and he asked us if we would be interested in coming over and being a young voice in the church. That was when I was 35, and I considered myself to still be young before I turned 40. And then he asked us if we would help start small groups and help with outreach here at the church. And so we thought about it. We prayed about it. We met with Pastor Al. We met with Ron. And one of the things that we told them was that if we come over, one of the things we want to do is we want to serve Pastor Al. We want the last years of his ministry to be some of the best years of his ministry. And so that was our heart and our goal and our intent when we walked over and came over to First Assembly. And as we came over to the church, Anytime you leave one church and you go to another church, you experience new relationships and different experiences and those sorts of things. And so when we came into the church here at First Assembly, the church is 100 years. Church was over 100 years old. Pastor Al had been here for 19 years and had really good established relationships with the people of the church. And so we came over to the church, and there was a good established group, a core of people who loved the church, who had been a part of this church for years, and it was that was a good thing. When we came over, Melissa and I came over from another church in town. My wife had attended for over a decade, was on staff at the church as a junior high pastor for a few years, and then we got married and she moved away down to Clarinda, and we pastored the church down there. And then moved up to Sioux City. When we moved up to Sioux City, we went back to the church and built relationships and got to know people and that sort of thing. And when we came over to First Assembly, there was a group of people, whether looking for a fresh start, looking to support us in ministry, whatever reason, decided to come along and join us in this venture that we had here at First Assembly to kind of come alongside and just be helpers and to support and to be a part of this church. And so that was a good thing. And then after that time, Pastor Al and us working together between 2012 and Pastor Al resigned at the end of 2014, there were more people that came to the church between that time. And really what happened unintentionally, I think what happened unintentionally, whether it was in mind, whether it was in perspective, whether in communication, whatever it was, it almost as if there was 3 churches in one church. And since we're talking about hot topics, this is not something we've ever talked about publicly, or I've ever publicly addressed as your pastor before until today. The first thing is this. Anything that I ever did or said that may have caused people to feel that way, caused you or others to feel that way, that there were separate groups or separate churches or anything like that, I apologize. That was never my intent. Our intent was to come over and love this church and serve and be in ministry and allow God to use us, and we were called to ministry and come over to this church. And so anything that I ever did or communicated as associate pastor or as lead pastor that has ever maybe caused any hurt or pain or any wound or any sort of division or divided attention, I want to apologize for from the platform to all of you. We are one church. We're First Assembly of God. Doesn't matter when you came, doesn't matter who you came with, doesn't matter what year you joined, doesn't matter what year you became a member. As of August 27th, 2017, any bad feelings, any unforgiveness, any animosity, any of those things we need to address, and we need to be unified around the mission of Jesus Christ. The mission, because there are too many people in this community who are lost and dying and going to hell if we don't do something about it. And no grudge or none of those things are worth it. Now, first and foremost, I want to say, if there is something and there's something that I've done, I want you to talk to me about it. I would love to talk with you. My door's open. You can call, text, Facebook me, whatever you want to. Let's get together and chat about it. If there's someone else from this church who has hurt you or did something to you, you need to work it out with that person. But as of today, we need to draw a line in the sand. We don't want to be separate groups of people. We don't want to have certain relationships. The reality is this, is there have been people who have come to this church before and they've said they haven't wanted to stay and be a part of it because they felt like there were cliques in the church. That is the last thing that I want to happen at this church. I never want any single person to walk through the door and feel like I don't have a place to have a relationship here. And so any areas where that may be happening or not happening, perceived, misperceived, communicated, miscommunicated, it needs to change. We're one church. This is First Assembly of God. There's no other, this is it. And when we came over in 2012, we dove all in. We came into this church and we gave it our absolute all. And we're still giving it our absolute all 5 years later. We don't have one foot in and we don't have one foot out. We are 100% dedicated to this church and seeing God continue to help us grow and to be in the healthiest church that we can be for this community. So I know this isn't really easy to talk about, and I know there may be some issues that it may be bringing up, but let me just encourage you with this. Last year, this was even a real deal between whatever was perceived here, not perceived here. There are people who thought there were big issues between First Assembly and Morningside and some things that were perceived. And so last year I made a call to Johnny, the pastor over at Morningside, and I talked to him. We talked for about a half hour. And I just said, hey, here's the deal. I don't know if you have anything against us. I know where my heart is. I don't have anything against you. You guys lead your church the way you want to do it. I'm going to lead our church the way that we want to do it. We want the best for you. I hope you want the best for us. And we talked for a few minutes about what that was and some of the conception, some of the perceptions when it all first happened and when everything, the transition was going on and what he felt like and some of the things we experienced. And, talked about that. We ironed it out. We squashed it. No issues. That's how it should be. And that's how it should be with us as a church. We want to be a united church because we want to follow Jesus Christ and we want to help other people follow Jesus Christ. We have a singular mission to follow Jesus, help other people follow Jesus. That's why we're here. We need to be united around that and reaching the world. The second thing I want to talk to you about is this. I want to talk about distracted families. I am so privileged to get to be a pastor. But it kills me to see families being torn apart all the time. Marriages being completely destroyed. Parents and their kids fighting against one another. Kids and parents and brothers and sisters and all those sorts of relationships just completely fractured. And our families become so distracted. We become so divided in our attention that we forget the love that we should have for one another. But I've been on the other side of the desk with too many married couples who are hurting. Life happens. It's always going to happen. Still not something I like to see. I know too many parents who are completely clueless and don't know what to do with their kids. Their kids feel beyond them. They don't know how to connect with them. They don't know how to have a relationship with them. I meet too many parents and hear the pain in their voices because their kids aren't serving and following Jesus Christ. The enemy is out to destroy our families. In 1 Peter 5:8 it says, be alert and sober and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. The enemy is always looking for a way in. He's always looking to get his foot in the door so he can work and destroy your family. And I know some of us are thinking, I think you're going a little bit overboard. He's not really doing anything to destroy my family. I can for certain tell you right now that the enemy is doing everything he can do to destroy your family, your marriage, your relationship with your kids, your relationship at work. He's doing everything he can do to destroy your family and my family. I experience the exact same things you do. Just because I'm a pastor doesn't mean that I don't have marriage challenges or I don't have challenges as a parent. I experience the same things you do. The enemy works just as hard against me as he does any of you to destroy your family and my family. And we need to pray for one another. Can I encourage you, if there's one thing that you ever do here at First Assembly, it's pray for all of the different families in our church. Single, married, divorced, widowed, whoever it is, pray for everyone in this church because the enemy is always working to destroy and distract. And so the question I want to ask you regarding your family is this. What's the number one distraction for you and your family? The thing that I most common hear between families is the work-life balance. They don't know how to get the work-life balance down. Is there such a thing as a work-life balance? What should it look like? What shouldn't it look like? All I'm going to say on that is just make sure you communicate with one another. If two parents are going in two separate directions when it comes to parenting, there's a good chance your kid's probably not going to end up in either one of the places that you're trying to get them to go to. I'm going to post it. I'll post it on Facebook later tonight or tomorrow. Melissa and I watched a message a couple months ago about parenting. And one of the things that was said was, we didn't parent, as we began to parent, we didn't parent with behavior in mind. We parented with the end in mind. And our goal was this. Our goal was that we wanted to raise children that when given the chance, they would want to spend time with us. And so when they were teenagers, when given the chance, they would actually want to spend time with us. When they were in college, they would want to spend time with us. When given the opportunity, they would want to spend time with us. And I know that we all want certain relationships that we have. We want our families to get along. But as a pastor, I see too many families being broken and separated and divided amongst each other. And I want to just encourage you this morning, whatever distraction that may or may not be there, whatever may be perceived or misperceived, you need to deal with it. You need to talk about it. You need to get on the same page with one another. It's okay to have different ideas. Just get there together on how you feel like you should work it out together. Last thing that I want to talk about, is distractions from church. Distractions from church. One of the other things that I think the enemy loves to do is he loves to distract us and divide our attention from the importance of church and church in our lives. And he does that in a lot of different ways. But I want to just share a few things that we miss out on when we don't come to church, when we don't make church a priority in our lives. Here's a couple things. The first thing is this. We lose our opportunity for corporate worship. We lose out on the opportunity to come and worship God together. There's something powerful that happens when the men and women of God get together and honor Jesus Christ. It's just an amazing thing. But we miss out on that opportunity for corporate worship. We lose the opportunity to serve others, whether it's in a ministry, it may be some sort of ministry here, but we miss out on the opportunity to serve others when we're not at church. Third thing is this, is we lose track of the way that God is working in our local church family and how we can play a part in it. We lose contact with each other. We've been talking about this in membership class, of having relationships in a community of people. You don't have to know everybody, but you have to know some people. We miss out on how God is working in other people's lives when we're not a part of what's going on in the church. Back behind this door over here, we have a board out there that says testimonies on the top, and we're encouraging you, if God's done something in your life or you have a testimony, to write it on one of those cards so we can celebrate and encourage those folks with the testimonies. God uses our testimonies to encourage other people and know what's happening in each other's lives. You know, you just got that new job, you just got that promotion, you just got that good health diagnosis. It could be any of those things. But we lose track of each other, essentially. 4 is we lose the opportunity to bring non-Christians to church. We miss out on the opportunity to help reach out to people who need Jesus Christ. We lose out on the opportunity to welcome new people that other people have invited that Sunday. You know, one of the things we encourage you to, invite people to church with you. Bring people to church with you. I want to encourage you, on September 10th, we're starting a new series called Finding Your Way Back to God. I want to encourage you to get a friend here to church that day. It isn't just for non-Christians, it's for all of us. This series is going to be for all of us, but finding our way back to God. We lose out on the opportunity that other people have went out of their way to invite a friend, and just to be that person who goes and shakes their hand and says, oh, hey, it's good. Thank you for coming to church today. And so we don't want to miss out on that opportunity. Number 6 is we lose out on the opportunity to learn more about the Bible. Whether it be Sunday school or through a conversation that you have. Last week in our board meeting we were talking, and 2 of our board members were talking about the Sunday school lesson that morning, and how, I think it was Luke 3, or there was just something brought out in Sunday school, just a new way of looking at something that they both just really appreciated. And so we can all have opportunities to grow and learn more about the Bible. Number 7, we lose the important we lose the opportunity to model for our children that church attendance is important. This is a biggie for me, and I know I'm a pastor, and so you probably think you have to say that because you're the pastor, but I do believe that church attendance is important. And if First Assembly isn't a home where you enjoy or you like to be a part of, then I'd encourage you to find a church that you can love and be a part of. But we want you to be here, and we want you to enjoy being here at church. But once again, I meet too many parents who are like, oh, my kids aren't in church, my kids aren't serving God, and they never came to church. They never really got plugged into church. And so we need to model for our children that church attendance is important. Number 8, we lose the opportunity to strengthen connections with fellow Christians, something I already talked a little bit about. Our relationship building is very important. Verse 9, we lose the opportunity to encourage the pastoral staff in the church. I know you guys won't believe this, but sometimes pastors get discouraged. Sometimes me and Pastor Tony get discouraged, or sometimes, things in life, sometimes we just have one of those weeks where just everything seems to go wrong. And it's just nice when church people come and say, hey, thank you for what you do. Or they encourage, hey, I'm glad to see what God's doing in your life. Finally, number 10 is Hebrews 10:25. We lose the opportunity to really obey God. Here's what Hebrews 10:25 says. Translations say, not to forsake. The NIV says, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit. It's become a habit for some people. It's become what they do or what they don't do. But encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. I don't know how you tell you this, friends, but the day is approaching. The day of Jesus Christ is approaching. This world is not getting any. The morality in our country is not growing. It doesn't seem to be. But one thing we know is the signs of the times. There's things that are happening around our world that would help us to understand that Jesus is coming back one day, and we need to get ourselves ready for that. We need to be prepared. We need to be sober-minded. We need to be alert and ready for that to happen. And Hebrews 10:25 says, don't forsake the assemblies. He says, don't take it lightly. Don't take church lightly. You can't take church lightly. What I think is really important for us to consider is, do we find things more appealing than church? And so if we have one mission, if we want to follow Christ and help other people follow Christ, we have to have a focus to do that. We have to be unified to do that. I know he's passed away now, but Arnold Palmer was a Hall of Fame golfer, and he created a nice drink, the lemonade and the iced tea. But one time he was in the Masters tournament, one of the majors of the year, and he was at the major, and he was on hole 18 and going into the last hole with a one-stroke lead. And he was walking up the 18th fairway. He had hit his first shot right in the middle of the fairway, and he was walking up to his ball, and he caught the eye of someone that he knew, a lifelong friend. And the lifelong friend motioned for him to come over. You don't really see this happen in golf. And this is probably part of the reason why. Arnold Palmer went over to him during the middle of the tournament on the last hole with a one-shot lead, about ready to cash in on a huge paycheck and to win the major golf tournament. He walked over, and all it was the guy said, congratulations, you're doing a great job. It's good to see you. And Arnold Palmer said, the second I shook his hand, I knew I lost all my focus. His next shot went over the green into a sand trap. His next shot went out of the sand trap, over the green, off the green. He ended up, I think, getting a bogey or double bogey on the hole. He lost the whole tournament. Simply because he lost focus for one tiny moment. A golf tournament is 4 days long, and on one hole he lost his focus. And when he lost his focus, it cost him the tournament. There is so much more at stake when it comes to people who need Jesus Christ than a golf tournament or millions of dollars. People's eternal souls are at stake. And so we want to follow Jesus. We want to lead others to follow Jesus Christ. This morning, as you can tell, we're going to have communion and take communion with one another. And in just a moment, we'll dismiss you by rows to come up and receive communion if you'd like to this morning. We practice open communion here. As long as you're a follower of Christ, we encourage you to take communion. But I want us to really reflect on 3 questions. Whether you're waiting to come and get your communion or whether you've got your communion and you're back in your seat, there's 3 questions I want us to look at this morning. First one is this: are we distracted and divided from authentic Christian community. For some of us, we need to look inside over maybe what's transpired here at First Assembly, maybe some of our understandings of how some things worked out. But really coming under the understanding that if we truly want to reach this world, there has to be a place where men and women and children can come and find authentic community in our church. Second question is, are we distracted or divided in our family life? What is that one thing that needs to change at home? What's that one thing that you need to do to limit that distraction at home? What's causing division in your marriage or between your family? The third question is this: are we distracted or divided from things that are more important than gathering in church? There's no such thing as a perfect church. We don't pretend that we're a perfect church. We're on a journey to be in the best church that we can be, in the healthiest church that we can be for our community. I believe that happens through authentic community, that happens when we value our family, and that happens when we value church and make it a priority and not an option. And so this morning, as we prepare ourselves to receive communion together, I want you to reflect on those questions. I want to read a scripture to you in just a moment. This is from John chapter 17. Jesus prays for himself, he prays for his disciples, and then he prays for the believers. And he says this in verse 20, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me, and I am in you, may they also be in us, and so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I and them, and you and me. May they be brought to complete unity, that the world may know that you sent me." Today, if we have one thing to unite around, it's around the cross of Christ. It's communion. It's receiving the bread and the emblem of blood this morning. And so I'm going to ask the couple ushers are going to come, and they're going to dismiss you by row. And as they dismiss you, come and get it. And I want you to think about these questions as we're preparing to close service this morning. So if the ushers want to come forward.